us who sing to thee. Alleluia.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Christ is risen.
Indeed he is risen.
Christ is risen.
Indeed he is risen.
Christ is risen.
Indeed he is risen.
You know, I think it's important that the story of doubting Thomas is told the Sunday immediately after Pascha. You know, because I don't know about you, but many people have sometimes told me about a Paschal letdown. I don't know if you've experienced that, but there's a whole build-up to Pascha, and it's like, it's Pascha, yeah. And then there's like Monday, it's like, it's Monday, and I can eat cheese, okay. And it's you know, they're all very happy, and then by Tuesday it's like, oh, things are getting back to normal. And it just kind of winds down, and it's kind of a letdown. But actually, you know, they think things go back to normal. But really, can they ever really go back to normal? No, they can't. But what happens is people let their guards down. They get so excited about Pascha, and then they're happy that it's Pascha, and it's such a blessed and spiritual time. Nothing can get, they just let their guard down, and that's when all sorts of temptations hit again. It's sort of like the first week of Lent in a weird way. It's like, oh, I've let my guard. Oh, I got it. We never let our guard down. Even amidst our joy, even amidst the great holiness that is Bright Week, we can't let our guards down. There's no excuse for it, because that's exactly what the devil's waiting. Gotta get let's make him bored now. Let's make him overeat. Oh yeah. We'll find out about that. It also reminds us of how unusual the events of the resurrection are. Not the letting us down, but the story of Thomas, of doubting Thomas. It reminds us how unusual the events of the resurrection truly are. You know, we get used to things. It's been 2,000 years now. We're kind of used to the idea. Oh yeah, Christ rose from the dead. No big problem. No, yeah, he rose from the dead. It's fine. If you think about 2,000 years ago, what? That's crazy. No one would believe that. It's we get used to this, but back then it was very startling. It was a shocking thing. Even though Christ had raised Lazarus and others had been raised from the dead, it was different for Christ. He did it himself. It wasn't a prophet saying by the power of God. He rose by himself. He rose by his own power. That's an amazing thing in and of itself. The thing is, though many today do believe the story of the resurrection, and rightly so, because it's true, the resurrection has become a sticking point, actually, for many people and their belief. I mean, many liberal Christians, theological, not political, there's nothing to do with politics when I say that, they've dispensed with the idea of the physical resurrection completely. A lot of them do. I remember there was a bishop in the Episcopal Church, Spong, I think his name was. Wrote a whole book about that. It didn't really happen. It wasn't a physical resurrection. It was some sort of spiritual event. This flies in the face of 2,000 years of history of the church and teaching of the church, but people have a hard time with the idea of a physical resurrection. Skeptics abound, as they say. Of course, skeptics have always abounded. Oddly, while the Jewish authorities of Christ's days, and even in the Talmud, do not dispute that Jesus was a wonder worker. Even the people that teach against Christ's teaching, if you look in the Talmud, they don't talk about that. They will talk about him being a wonder worker. Even his enemies thought, yeah, he was a wonder worker. Yes, he performed miracles. But they all disputed the resurrection. They would try to refute it. We heard about how the Jewish authorities spread the rumor that Christ's body had been taken by his disciples and hidden. That was one of the things they wanted to teach. The only problem with this is that the apostles had very little to gain from this assertion. They spread the faith, brought many to faith, but they did not gain materially by this. They didn't gain anything. Christianity in their day was not the worldwide phenomenon that it became and is today. People love to point out the church, oh, they just have your money, oh, they just look at the big buildings and they go, and all the fancy stuff and all those things the churches have. As you can see, we're surrounded by that. That wasn't the early church. They weren't surrounded by that. It was a tiny, hated, persecuted minority faith, which brought the apostles poverty, beatings, chains, and for the most of them, a martyr's death. We heard about today about Peter and John being in prison, and the people being in prison, and the angels rescuing them from prison, but still, they were put in prison. One is not likely to submit to these things willingly for a known lie. If they had stolen Christ's body and hid it, they go, okay, now let's make up stuff that's going to get us persecuted. They're not going to do that. Just people wouldn't do that for a lie. It's obvious they must have experienced something that gave them hope and courage to face such odds and to persevere. We, the faithful, understand what this is, but I'm sure it can baffle the unbeliever and the skeptic. But let's talk a little bit about skepticism itself. Skepticism gets a bad rap in faith circles. But is it really, skepticism itself, really such a bad thing? It's not a bad thing in and of itself. Why would I say that? Questions push one to seek for answers. If one seeks honestly and with a completely open mind, then one is likely to find the truth. There's a movie out right now called The Case for Christ, about just such a skeptic. His wife had converted to Christianity. He was an atheist. He was an investigative journalist. He says, okay, I'm going to prove all this stuff wrong. So he starts going on, looking at the historical records. He starts going on his search. And it's a true story. And he became a devout believer himself. He couldn't refute it. And he really started digging into the sources. He couldn't do it. And now he's a minister himself. He's a pastor somewhere and has written 20 books about the subject. I recommend the movie. It's actually a pretty good movie. Oftentimes Christian movies aren't the best. I hate to say that. I want to say they are, but oftentimes they're not really quite as good. This one actually was very well acted, well put together movie. But as our Lord said, seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened to you. Didn't say seek and you shall be discouraged because people will say you should just believe blindly. No, it said seek and you will find. We're called to seek. I mean, even Nathaniel, when Philip came to him and said, hey, we found the Christ, he was a little skeptical. He says, yeah, what good can come out of that? What did Philip say? He said, come and see. Now, Nathaniel went and saw, and he received the truth. But skepticism, in and of itself, is actually a necessary protection. We're not called to blind faith, as it said, but to test the spirits. If we were not skeptical, then we could fall prey to just about every religious huckster out there. Or even worse, spiritual deceptions. We're called, as I said, to test the spirits. If we aren't skeptical, if we don't ask questions, if we don't turn our back on some things and cross ourselves, then we'll fall prey to any kind of spiritual deception. That's exactly what the devil wants us to do. Skepticism makes us ask questions, as I said. And there are many things that we encounter about the resurrection. If we look at the ways things are presented in the Scriptures in the Holy Tradition, then we find that the very way they are presented make them seem more reliable. Now, what are some of the aspects of Scriptures in our tradition that do this? First off, and one might be surprised by this, is the fact that women were the first witnesses of the resurrection. Today, we'd find that unremarkable. They just have to be the ones that say, yeah, okay, so it's not radical. It's not unexpected, okay. To many in the ancient days, though, and perhaps to those who follow Sharia law today, this would be an embarrassment. It would be a complete embarrassment. Women were not considered to be the most reliable witnesses. You needed more witnesses, more women than you needed a man. One man to every 2 women for witnesses, or something like that. The reason these things got abolished over time. It's Christianity that changed much of this attitude. And there's a reason why that many of the first Christians were women, and then the men in their lives became Christians. Christianity offered, contrary to what some say today, more freedom for women than many of them had ever had in the ancient Mediterranean world. The Gospels insist, though, that this is what happened. The Gospel writers insisted, yes, okay, it was women that came first to saw the resurrection. The first witnesses to the resurrection were women. Mary Magdalene is called, what did we call her? The apostle to the apostles. This insistence in the Gospels on what some back then, not now certainly, would have been unthinkable actually lends credence to the tale. The writers did not try to hide this embarrassing fact, supposedly embarrassing, from their readers. Those who did not witness the risen Lord, the people who are reading it 60, 70, 80, 90 years later, they didn't see it. But they could read about it. But this truth was not hidden from them. The world for women began to change because of this very action. Next we have the power of oral tradition. People passed on their stories. People told the stories first by word of mouth. And contrary to today's literate, perhaps intellectually arrogant population, oral tradition is actually a pretty strong way to preserve knowledge. Ask any traditional people who rely on it how important it is to keep things straight and correct. In the pre-literate Irish culture, they had people whose only job, this was their sole job, was to memorize the genealogies of their kings. Another person's, only job was to memorize the laws of the people. It's like a walking law library. These people had amazing memories. They could memorize hundreds of years of genealogies. They could memorize, what we'd say was a whole bookshelf of books. They had it all in their mind, in their memory. And they had ways of training themselves to keep memories like that. So people who don't read a lot, they have a way of doing this. They had poetry, sagas, history, all that had to be committed to memory. And in the recitation, if one made a mistake, everyone would know it and call them out on it. It's sort of like if you have kids and you're reading them a bedtime story that's one of the favorites, and you start to change something, what is the kid likely to do? He's not going to say, "Oh, did the book change?" It's like, "No, Mom, that's not how it goes." "Daddy, no, you can't change it, Dad. That is not how it goes. Go back." They might not even be able to read, but they'll point to the book exactly in the language. No, it says here, that's actually how my mom began to read. My mom learned how to read because her parents read the same book to her over and over again, and when they started changing stuff and skipping things, my mom said, "No, you missed something. You forgot that line right there." They go, "What does it say?" And she read the whole thing. They didn't realize she'd learned to read by that one. So the Gospels were finally, though, written down. They were finally written down because the apostles were dying. They were dying out, and as were the other eyewitnesses. That which was most important was written down, while other things remained part of the oral tradition. The interpretation of Scriptures, how we interpret things, and things like that. We even hear this in today's Gospel. And truly, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. There's many things that Christ did and said and taught. We talked about the road to Emmaus. He opens up the Scriptures to Luke and Cleopas. Well, how do we know how to interpret them? Well, we know how to interpret the Scriptures because it's been passed on through the Church Fathers. What Cleopas and Luke learned, they passed on as well, a way to interpret the Scriptures. As I said, in addition to the oral tradition, the apostles did finally write down their Gospels. And Gospel is good news. The Gospels of all the ancient books have probably the best manuscript tradition in the world. It's an amazing thing. Other ancient books like the Iliad and the Odyssey, or the works of Plato and Aristotle, the Egyptian books of the Dead, and all these things like that, they have a much fewer ancient manuscripts and copies. Might have like 10 or 15 of one, like 2,000 of the Gospels. I mean, it's an order of magnitude difference between how many Gospels we have, how many ancient manuscripts we have through time of the Gospels, as opposed to, say, the Iliad or the Odyssey or Plato's dialogues. But the funny thing is, no one ever doubts that Plato or Socrates existed. Anybody questions whether was that really the Republic, or did Socrates really say that? I don't believe Socrates really said that. I'm not going to believe in Socrates' teaching. People don't do that. They do that with Christ, though. They don't trust the Christian documents because they don't want to, in some ways, because it puts demands on us. No one doubted that Homer existed, writer of the Iliad. In fact, as time goes on, we're more sure that there really was a poet called Homer who created the Iliad and the Odyssey. I actually just read that in a magazine this weekend, and an archaeologist was saying, we're pretty sure there really was a Homer. Some like to point out that there are differences in the Gospels. Even the Church Fathers knew that the Gospels had different points of view, and some differences in chronology or the exact phrasing of how something happened. But it didn't bother them. Because these differences are actually a positive thing. As it was pointed out in the movie that I mentioned, when a lawyer hears witnesses, the witnesses say all the things in two exact duplication. If you have like 3 eyewitnesses and they all say exactly the same thing, with exactly the same details, you know what they start to think? Someone has gotten to them and given them a script. They've colluded with each other and figured out what to say. They're hiding something. They're not telling the truth. Because you have 3 people who see the same event or they're not going to come out with all the exact little details and things like that. Each eyewitness brings a different perspective and emphasis that creates the whole picture. They round it out completely. And that's what the Gospels do. So the skepticism about the Scriptures and the account of the resurrection can lead us to be able to affirm their truth in these various ways. And I'm only skimming the surface with this, even though I'm going on and on. Today we remember the doubt of Thomas. We use a term like doubting Thomas as a negative phrase, but should it be? Thomas's doubt was normal. I mean, didn't the other apostles also doubt at first? They did. We can understand his doubt to a certain extent. But there are negative aspects of his doubt. There's no doubt about that. There is a reason that Christ gently, and he was gentle, gently chided Thomas and told him not to be unbelieving, but believing. Why? If doubt or skepticism can be good, was Thomas's doubt questioned a bit? There's a clue to this. His nickname was what? Didymus, which means the twin. He doesn't mention that he actually had a twin, Thomas and Timmy, his twin. They don't talk about that, but some church fathers, though, see in this description, this nickname, a description of his character. He could be double-minded, in other words, or hard to convince, even in the face of truth. He would keep some of his skepticism. He was maybe what we'd say a bit cynical and unbelieving, even when he believed. He'll believe, but he also had, I don't know if I believe. It's sort of like the man who says, Lord, I believe, help thou my unbelief. And this character of his, it predated his statements about not believing unless he could touch the Lord's hand in his side. Probably why he even said it. Think of it this way. He'd been told by trusted friends and colleagues with whom he had lived and traveled for 3 years that they had seen the risen Lord. When we think of it that way, we can see how deep his cynicism or his skepticism in a negative way could reach. Some would say he could not believe because it was too good to be true, and that's reasonable. Maybe he just think, I can't believe it, it's too great. But there's also that twin-minded element, which even when a friend tells him that he has a hard time believing. Now, if a stranger had come up to him, hey, guess what? I saw your master walking around in the market the other day. He goes, yeah, right. That would be understandable. But when your best friend comes up and says, hey, guess what? He says, I don't believe it. What happens when your friend does that to you? When you tell him something, I got an A on the test. Yeah, right. You did. I don't believe you. But I did. I mean, no, yeah, right, But it's painful. It hurts your feelings when someone does that. It reveals a lack of trust. And this is the situation with Thomas, and many modern people, it seems. Thomas had reliable witnesses telling him the truth, and we have reliable witnesses telling us the truth. And still doubt arises. We are called to believe, though, and if we do have faith, we will be blessed, even if we've not seen, as we heard in today's gospel, or rather because we have not seen for ourselves, but we have the faith we believe. As I said, no one doubts that Plato or Socrates existed, nor should they. We have a manuscript deposit that includes fragments of the Gospels that are just one or two generations removed from the time of the Gospels. The time of when the apostles were around, like things that go back to 90 AD. Some of the apostles were still alive at that time. I think 20 years is a generation. So we talk about people are still writing books about the Kennedy assassination. That was 50 some odd years ago. 2.5 generations or so. People don't question whether it happened, I can remember things that happened 20 years ago. I'm still talking about it. And I tell you about something happened. It'll be fairly accurate. I might embellish a little. We also have the writings of those who were taught directly by the apostles, and this is an important thing too. We have a continuous tradition handed down by them to us to this very day. But most importantly of all, more important than a continuity of texts, an apostolic succession, or a reliable oral tradition. And I'm not saying anything bad about these. These are very important. They're foundational. Don't misunderstand me about this. Most of all, though, we have lives transfigured by the faith. We have murderers who became apostles. Paul. Saul became Paul. Or holy men. We have St. Moses the Ethiopian, who was a terrible criminal, who became a very, very holy man. Those are just two of countless examples. We have the example of a sexually depraved person who became a wonder worker, who could walk on water or levitate as she prayed. St. Mary of Egypt. People were given the strength during the persecutions to endure terrible tortures and even make jokes about it. There's one guy who was being put on some sort of rack to be burned by the Romans. They were about to turn him over. He said, no, I'm not done on this side yet. That's crazy. That's nuts. Who would make jokes like that? But, it just shows the level of their faith. That they would say, no, I'm not done. It's like, and we even have stories from the 20th century with the Russian martyrs. I told the story about the man who was thrown out of the train into the snow, and the bear curled up and kept him warm. Now, he was later martyred, and I think he was shot. But he had time before that to find his own personal repentance and to teach more people and pass on more of his wisdom. But the Lord strengthens people for this. People don't normally go into martyrdom easily. Somehow, a lot of the martyrs did. They were able to find peace. And even amidst terrible tortures, they didn't feel the pain all the time. Some of them did, but some of them didn't. It was an amazing thing the Lord was able to do. We have modern wonder workers, and I don't believe things just to the idea of, this happened 500, 600, 700, 900,000 years ago. We have modern wonder workers. St. John Maximovich. You could enter a locked hospital room. There are stories of him walking into hospital wards where the doors had all been locked, and visiting people and leaving them gifts when you shouldn't have been able to get into the place in the first place. And he was able to enter the room just as Christ entered the room with the apostles. Kind of walk through the door. We have an elder Emilianos, who recently, I think it was a few years ago, passed away, fell asleep in the Lord, who was able by the grace of God to be in two places at once. He was on Mount Athos, celebrating a liturgy, and was also in Kansas helping someone who had been crushed by, I think it was in Kansas, was crushed by a construction accident, saved her life. She became a nun later, became Orthodox and became a nun. It's an amazing thing, and he actually admitted it to her when he met her years later. He met her years later, or I should say, he re-met her. And it's an amazing story. Miracles still abound. We ask, will wonders never cease? No, they will not cease. The wonders will never cease. Because tradition is not just a teaching. That's the important thing. Tradition is not just things in a book or things that have been passed on orally. It is a way of life, and even more, it is the life of the Holy Spirit in the church. He's there to guide and teach all who will believe and want to believe, but who doubt. The Holy Spirit will teach and guide. He will teach us to fall down before Christ as Thomas did and cry out, "My Lord and my God." In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Christ is risen.
Indeed is risen.
Christ is risen.
Indeed is risen.
Christ is risen.
Indeed he is risen.
Come, let us worship and fall down before Christ. Save us, O Son of God, who art risen from the dead. Save us who sing to thee.